The room of mirrors, there is a room you've lived in for as long as you can remember, but it never felt like a room, because it had no walls, no chains, no bars to rattle, just mirrors, tall and silver, quiet and still, lining every inch of your world like watchful eyes, reflecting everything, yet revealing nothing. You never questioned them, you grew up in their light. The boy who smiled when praised, the girl who apologized when too loud, the student who memorized what mattered, the employee who learned when to nod and when to stay silent. Every time you moved, the mirrors responded, like a choreography of approval, reflecting back the image of who you were supposed to be. You thought it was you. But over time, something cracked, a hairline fracture, like a line drawn in still water. You saw it when you said yes but felt no. When you laughed but your soul didn't echo, and you achieved everything, yet felt like nothing. And then one day you leaned in. Not with pride, not with vanity, but with suspicion. You looked at your reflection. Truly looked, and for the first time you noticed the seams. The smile was stretched too perfect, the posture rehearsed, the eyes hollow. Beneath the glass there were layers, masks over masks, the obedient student, the agreeable friend, the productive citizen, the free individual. But freedom, real freedom, does not look like this. Because these mirrors did not show your face, they showed your conditioning, your training. The result of years spent mastering the art of fitting in. What you thought was freedom was just the absence of visible chains. You weren't caged, you were curated. In the room, it wasn't built around you, it was built through you. This is the matrix, not as a futuristic prison, but as a psychological condition. You live inside it every time you speak the way you're expected to. Every time you shrink your soul to fit a script. Every time you trade your inner truth for external peace. Carl Jung once warned, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Because the soul is not comfortable, it is not polished. It does not smile on demand. To face your soul is to step beyond the mirrors, to peel off the persona, the social skin, layer by layer, until what's left is something raw, something real, something terrifying. Alan Watts said that the ego is an illusion, a role we play for so long, we forget it's a performance. And the Matrix is this performance, systematized. A dance of egos, theater of masks. No one questions the script. No one sees the stage. Because we've confused the costume for the character. Sometimes, just sometimes, the mask slips. In solitude and crisis, in the quiet moments when the noise fades and the mirrors fall silent, then the room begins to flicker. And you see it for what it is. A hall of reflections, not reality. It's a loop of images, not identity. Nietzsche called it the herd instinct, the unconscious drive to belong, to merge, to dissolve into the group. He saw that most people would rather be accepted in a lie than isolated in truth, because awakening is not glamorous. It is violent, uncomfortable. It rips the floor out from under everything you've ever called you. Who are you when no one is watching? When you are no longer being measured, ranked, rewarded? When the script burns in your hands and there is no director to give you your next line, this is the beginning of individuation, not rebellion, not escape, but return. The mirrors cannot be smashed. They will always be there, reflections of who the world wants you to be, but you can stop believing in them. You can stop mistaking your image for your essence. You can choose to walk through the room without losing yourself in its light. Kierkegaard called this inwardness, the painful paradox of becoming yourself in a world that prefers replicas, a slow death of illusion, a rebirth of depth. It is not a pleasant journey, but it is real. The Matrix doesn't need your fear. It only needs your agreement, your participation, your silence. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You may live among others, but you will never again be of them. You will smile less, but mean it more. You will speak less, but say what matters. You will act less, but move with purpose. You are no longer a reflection. You are no longer a persona. You are no longer asleep. This is not a journey out. It is a journey within. And though the room may look the same, you are not. The mirrors still surround you, but now reflect a ghost they can no longer hold, a presence they can no longer shape, a soul that has remembered itself. The illusion that feels like freedom. You wake up to the sound of your alarm, a familiar buzz, a familiar rhythm. The same gray light spills through the blinds. You shower, you dress, you check your phone. Notifications, updates, new things to want, new ways to perform. The day begins. But you've stopped noticing, because this isn't living. It's looping. You walk the same path to the same obligations, carrying the invisible script you never wrote, but memorized long ago. A productive citizen, an efficient thinker, a digital participant. You are free, they say. You can choose your job, your phone, your latte, your avatar. You can speak, you can scroll, you can buy, and you do, but deep down, you sense it. The hollowness behind the choices, the silence beneath the noise. A slow, pulsing ache that says, something is missing. It only becomes audible when the noise dies. In the early hours of the morning, or the moment before sleep, that's when the illusion cracks. For a second you wonder, was any of this ever really mine? Carl Jung called it the modern dilemma, to be surrounded by information, yet starved of meaning. To mistake the persona, the polished mask presented to the world, for the soul buried beneath it. And in today's world, that persona is constantly curated. Your image is fed through algorithms. Your desires are shaped by trends. Your beliefs mirror the crowd, and yet you believe you're free. That's the genius of the Matrix. It doesn't chain you. It convinces you you've already escaped. In the ruins of real culture, a new religion has taken hold. Choice. The god of consumer freedom. Pick your brand. Pick your label. Pick your politics. Pick your personality. But they all come from the same factory of meaning, designed not to liberate, but to distract. Because when you are always reacting, you never question the stage you're dancing on. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this illusion clearly. He wrote about the herd instinct, the unconscious force that pulls us to conform, to blend, to obey the rhythm of the majority, even when it strangles our individuality. We don't notice it because it feels good to belong, to be liked, to be normal. But normal is a costume stitched from fear, and comfort is the enemy of awakening, because awakening demands you look directly at the thing you've spent your entire life avoiding, yourself, Schopenhauer once said. A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. In other words, you are not as free as you think. Your desires are not born in solitude. They're whispered to you by culture, branded into your nervous system by repetition, approval, and fear. And so you obey. Not out of force, but fatigue. It's easier that way. You work not to live, but to prove. To prove you matter. To prove you're keeping up. To prove you're not failing. Productivity becomes virtue. Busyness becomes identity. And rest. Rest feels like guilt. This is the architecture of modern despair. Not loud, not obvious, but ambient. Background radiation humming in your bloodstream. Kierkegaard called it the despair that doesn't know it's despair, the most dangerous kind, because it wears a smile. It collects trophies. It scrolls, endlessly, trying to fill the space where the self once lived. And when the soul begins to speak, when you feel the emptiness pulling at the corners of your life, you scroll faster, you turn up the volume. You call it anxiety. You call it burnout. But what it really is mourning. The mourning of a self you've never truly met. Alan Watts reminded us that the ego is not who you are, it is who you think you are. It's the mask that says, I am this job. I am this belief. I am this reputation. But who are you when none of those things remain? When the performance ends and there is no audience left, that silence is terrifying, but also sacred. Because in that silence you remember. You remember the parts of you that don't perform, the quiet inward voice that doesn't want to be marketed, the dreams you had before they were optimized, the questions you stopped asking because they weren't useful. You remember that the matrix was never imposed. You walked into it willingly, because it offered comfort and you were tired, because it offered approval and you were afraid. That's okay. But now you've seen the code. You see that freedom? Here's a costume. That authenticity is filtered. That meaning has been replaced with metrics. And in that moment of seeing, the world doesn't change. You do. The glass no longer feels solid. The mirrors begin to ripple. You walk the same streets, but your footsteps echo differently. Because now you carry a different silence. Not the silence of ignorance, but of awareness. And from that silence, something begins to grow. Not rebellion, not resistance, but recognition. That real freedom is not in the choices you're offered, but in the awareness of the forces offering them. That real selfhood is not built from brands, but from being. And that truth is not loud, it whispers, and waits for you to stop and listen. The shadow that lives behind your smile. There is a door within you. It doesn't creak. It doesn't speak. But you've passed it 1,000 times without knocking. Behind that door lives a stranger. You've heard it move before, in the heat of an argument, in the hollow silence after a fake smile, in the sudden rush of emotion you couldn't explain. It is the part of you you've been trained to hide, the part that rages in silence. Yes. That doubts what you've been told is sacred, that resents the demand to be pleasant, to be agreeable, to be good. This is the shadow. Carl Jung wrote that the shadow is not some distant villain lurking in darkness. It is everything we once were before the world told us what we should be. Before we shaved the edges off our truth to fit into what was acceptable. It is the anger you swallowed because nice people don't get angry. The tears you held back because strong people don't break. Questions you never asked because good people don't doubt. The shadow is not evil. It is not the enemy. It is only dangerous when ignored. Because what we repress does not disappear. It hides, and it waits. Schopenhauer once said, "Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world." But what if your vision is limited because part of your soul has been forced to live in exile? Modern culture has mastered the art of repression. It teaches us to fear discomfort, to silence anything that doesn't make us profitable, predictable, pleasant, to confuse pain with weakness and rebellion with pathology. Are you anxious? You must be broken. Are you angry? You must be dangerous. You tired of pretending? You must be depressed. We do not listen to the soul. We diagnose it. And so we keep smiling, keep scrolling, we keep performing. But something begins to rot beneath the surface. A strange numbness, a quiet dread, the creeping feeling that the life you're living belongs to someone else, because in some ways it does. You traded pieces of your truth for safety, for praise, for inclusion. But the soul is not a negotiator. It does not forget what you buried, then it will find its way back. Through dreams, through breakdowns, through the soft collapse of your perfectly curated life. Nietzsche warned of this. He spoke of the abyss, the dark, infinite place inside each of us, not as a threat, but as a teacher, he wrote. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. But most people don't gaze. They glance, then they turn away. Because what they see terrifies them. They see the shadow, unfiltered, unapologetic, unruly, and they mistake it for madness. When really it is truth. It's undressed, unedited, unashamed. Jung believed that wholeness is impossible without integrating the shadow. To become yourself, you must face everything you've been taught to disown. It's not to indulge it, not to let it control you, but to make peace with it, to understand it, to welcome it home. But culture doesn't teach wholeness. It teaches fragmentation. It rewards those who compartmentalize, who separate the soul from the self and perform convincingly. And so the matrix deepens, not because someone is controlling you, but because you're controlling yourself to avoid rejection, to stay lovable, to feel safe. But the cost is staggering. You lose access to your own rage, and with it your boundaries. You lose access to your grief, and with it your capacity for joy. You lose access to your doubt, and with it your freedom to think. You become a well-behaved ghost. Polite, functional, empty. Kierkegaard called this the despair of not being oneself, a quiet, constant ache. Not because you've failed, but because you've never truly begun. And the longer you delay this reckoning, the harder it becomes. The more fragile your mask, the more brittle your identity. There is a path out. And paradoxically, it begins by going in, to the forgotten rooms of your psyche, into the forest of your unspoken emotions, to the cave where the shadow lives. Alan Watts once said, "You don't look out there for God, you look in you." And perhaps the same is true for truth. It's not out there in the likes, the validations, the roles. It's in here. It's in the messy, raw, untamed wilderness of what you actually feel. The shadow is not your enemy, it's your compass. It points to where you were wounded, to what you had to suppress in order to survive. And now it's asking to be seen. So go. Open the door, let the stranger speak. You may tremble, you may cry. You may not recognize the voice at first, but listen anyway, because it's yours. And until you claim it, you'll never truly be free. The crisis that breaks the illusion there comes a moment. Not loud, not sudden, but hollow, like a bell that doesn't ring when it should. You wake up one morning, everything looks the same. The sunlight touches the floor with its usual softness. The coffee steams. The notifications blink. But something is different, not in the world, in you. As if you've stepped outside your own life and are watching it from across the room. Like a stranger sitting in the seat of your own soul. You look in the mirror, and for the first time, you don't recognize what looks back. You remember the goals, the sacrifices. The years spent climbing ladders, collecting approval, sculpting the you they would applaud. And they did applaud. You got the job, the followers, the security, the nods of silent admiration. But now, under the weight of everything you thought you wanted, you feel nothing, just an emptiness that echoes. Carl Jung called this the crisis of misidentification. When the persona you built to survive has outlived its usefulness, when the mask fuses with the skin, and you can no longer tell where performance ends and person begins. And so begins the descent, not into failure, not into madness, but into truth. This is what Kierkegaard named the sickness unto death, a form of despair not born from what you've lost, owed from what you never truly had yourself, because you didn't just become successful, you became what the world wanted. And in doing so, you bartered away something priceless, something wordless, something essential, your soul. At first it whispers, then it aches, then it demands. You try to distract yourself. More noise, more work, more dopamine, but nothing satisfies, because the illusion is cracked. The matrix, this social simulation of meaning and identity, is no longer seamless. There's a glitch, a flicker, sudden painful knowing, and in that knowing, the real descent begins. You may lose friends, you may lose titles, you may lose your sense of certainty, because all of it was wrapped around the version of you that no longer wants to be alive. And so, you fall, not down, but inward, into silence, to solitude, into the abyss Nietzsche warned us about. He wrote, "If you gaze long enough into the abyss gazes also into you." But what he didn't mean was horror. He meant truth. The abyss is not a monster. It is a mirror. And it shows you everything you've denied, avoided, or abandoned in your climb, to be loved by a world that never knew your name. This fall, this crisis, is not a failure. It is a threshold, a sacred collapse, a violent return to the self you forgot. Schopenhauer wrote that suffering is not a flaw in existence, but its very engine, that it strips us of illusion and offers us no comfort but clarity. And here clarity begins to burn. You see how much of your life was driven by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of invisibility, fear of being misunderstood. You see how deeply you longed to belong, so much that you erased yourself to remain part of the herd. But now the herd has passed you by. And all that's left is the echo of footsteps and the voice that was buried beneath them. This is the dark night of the soul, the void, the mirrorless room, where no one is watching, where no one is applauding, where you can no longer lie to yourself and still sleep peacefully at night. Alan Watts called this the great unmasking, the moment when you realize that the self you clung to was just a role, and that the deeper you was always watching, waiting, beneath it. And what does that deeper self want? Not status, not certainty, not control. It wants only this: to be real, to cry without shame, to rage without permission, to doubt without guilt, to be without needing to justify it. But realness has a cost. It means losing the image. It means being misunderstood. It means walking alone through the ruins of the life you built before you ever asked what you truly wanted. But paradoxically, This is where freedom begins. Because once the illusion breaks, you don't go back. You can't go back. You've seen the lie, and now even silence feels more honest than the noise you once called success. Jung called this the beginning of individuation. Not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. Facing the paradoxes, integrating the contradictions, wearing no mask but your own, and the journey ahead. It's long, it's lonely, it's real, but for the first time, you are no longer acting. You are no longer pretending. You are becoming. So if you rehear, standing in the rubble of your former self, Dante run. The pain is not punishment. It is permission. To begin again, to begin at last, with truth. The self beyond the simulation, there is no exit door, no secret passage, no red button that collapses the system. The matrix, this invisible web of expectations, roles, algorithms, and inherited beliefs, doesn't need fences. It lives in your language, in your habits, in your self-concept. And so, to escape it, you must do the most radical thing imaginable. Stop believing in it, not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of return. The real path isn't outward, it is inward. Carl Jung called it individuation, the slow, painful emergence of the self from the shadow of the world. It is not the pursuit of happiness, nor the fight for freedom. It is the quiet unraveling of illusion until only what is real remains. Picture a forest, dense, muffled, overgrown. You stand at the edge, staring in. This is the psyche, untamed, ancient, whispering with voices you've ignored for years. To enter is to leave behind the map, the labels, the false light of external approval. It is to walk into your own silence and stay there long enough to hear the voice beneath the noise, the one that says, I don't want this life. I never believed in that. I've always felt something deeper. That voice is not your ego. It is your essence, the part of you that was buried under performance, the child who once painted without purpose, the teenager who questioned everything, the adult who secretly grieves the life that should have been. But we were taught to silence that voice, to pathologize it, to call it unrealistic, immature, irrational. Jung saw this as the core wound of the modern psyche, that we are taught to wear masks so convincingly. We forget they were ever masks at all, and so the journey back is not linear. It is alchemical. It burns. It contradicts. It confuses. You must sit with the parts of yourself you tried to exile. The rage, the grief, the strangeness, the wildness, quiet longing to simply be, without justification. This is the process of integration, of facing the shadow not as an enemy to conquer, but as a twin to embrace. Only when you no longer fear the darker rooms of your psyche can you begin to feel whole again. And wholeness is not perfection, is paradox, as Kierkegaard wrote. To be strong and soft, to be grounded and lost, to feel despair and yet still move. The world will not understand this, because the world loves symmetry. It loves consistency. It loves boxes, even if they become cages. But you are no longer a product. You are not a brand. You are not a role. You're something that breathes outside the algorithm. You're becoming unmarketable, and that is liberation. Nietzsche called this becoming the Bermensch, not a superior man, but one who creates his own values after the death of inherited ones. It is not arrogance, it is responsibility. It's a burden of authoring your own life without a script, but it's terrifying too, because no one tells you what happens after the illusion shatters. They don't tell you that freedom feels like falling, that it comes with isolation, that it demands you let go of certainty in exchange for sincerity. Schopenhauer said that solitude is the wellspring of clarity, that only in aloneness can the self hear itself think, and so you retreat, not in bitterness, but in reverence. You go inward not to escape others, but to stop escaping yourself. You sit with the quiet, you sift through memory. You watch the masks peel away one by one like autumn leaves, till you're no longer sure what remains. But in that nakedness, something new is born, a stillness, not empty, but alive, not loud, but undeniable. Lon Watts described it as the place beyond striving, where you no longer chase an image but simply observe. And in the act of pure attention, you begin to feel real again. You begin to choose, not based on fear or status or imitation, but on alignment. You do less, but with more meaning. Speak less, but with more truth. You belong less, but you betray yourself no more. This is not escape. This is arrival. The matrix no longer holds you because you no longer hold on to it. See it. The ads, the personas, the endless noise. And it moves through you, but it no longer moves you. You walk through the world, but your steps aren't dictated by it. You are not above it. You are beside it, with awareness. That's what individuation means. Not that you've transcended humanity, but that you finally remembered your own. You return to the world, not with a new mask, but with no need for one. People may not recognize you. Some may walk away. Some may laugh, but that no longer matters. Because now, when you look in the mirror, you don't see a performance. You see presence. You see a face that's no longer trying to be good or likable or safe, but true. And in that truth, you are finally free. Why most will never leave freedom is not a doorway. It is a weight. It's the heaviest of all burdens. To belong to no one but yourself. To answer to no script. To live in truth, not comfort. Most people speak of freedom as if it is an escape hatch, a thrilling leap into endless possibility. But the reality is quieter and far more terrifying. Because to truly leave the matrix, the illusion of safety, identity, and belonging is not to find paradise. It is to stand alone in the middle of a fog-covered road with no signs, no applause, and no one telling you who you are. It is to realize there is no one left to blame, no system to scapegoat, no culture to hide behind, no persona to soften the edges of your doubt, only you, and the quiet responsibility of becoming real. Nietzsche wrote, "Freedom is the will to be responsible for oneself." But he knew, too, that most would not take that path, because the herd offers something freedom never can. Warmth, ease, a script, and the script is seductive. It tells you who to be, what to want, what to fear, what to avoid. It tells you you're a good person as long as you stay within the lines. It promises praise and likes and certainty. But it has one condition. You must forget who you really are. And so most stay, not because they are blind, but because they are afraid. Afraid of silence, afraid of ambiguity. Afraid of being exiled by the tribe for the crime of becoming whole. Carl Jung understood this fear. He saw that the path of individuation, the journey to become yourself, is paved not with clarity, but contradiction. You must face your shadow, question your beliefs, step outside the identity you spent your life polishing. And this is not a rebellion. It's a death. The death of the false self, the death of borrowed dreams, the death of belonging. Most people do not want to die that way. They would rather remain comfortable in chains than risk the loneliness of liberation. And who could blame them? The cost of truth is often everything you built before you knew what truth was. Schopenhauer said that most people live in a dream of life, where they avoid suffering by staying busy, where distraction is medicine and stillness is poison. Because in stillness, you begin to see. And once you see, you cannot unsee. You begin to notice how much of your life was inherited, your opinions, your habits, even your values. You see the cracks in the foundations of your identity and it shakes you. You begin to understand why Kierkegaard said, "The most common form of despair is not being who you are." But understanding this is not enough. Living it is the true burden. You no longer speak in slogans. You no longer chase what others crave. You no longer participate in the rituals of the unconscious. And in doing so, you become foreign. People won't know how to relate to you. You may be called arrogant, detached, strange, because they see you've stopped playing the game, and for those still inside it. Nothing is more threatening than someone who has walked away without asking permission. And yet the awakened must stay, not above society, but beside it. You return not as a savior, but as a witness. You carry silence into noise, stillness into movement, truth into illusion, not to change the world, but to remain unchanged by it. Alan Watts said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The goal is not to become someone new. It's to stop pretending to be someone you're not. You do not need a new mask. You need the courage to live without one. But that courage comes at a price. Solitude, misunderstanding, the loss of external validation. It is the price of walking the path of the real. As a forest grows darker, the deeper you go. And sometimes you forget why you entered it in the first place. But then you hear it, a faint sound, a quiet hum beneath the leaves, the voice you silenced long ago, now clear, now alive, now yours. And you remember, you did not leave the matrix for glory. You left because your soul refused to be edited. You left because no one else could give you your name. You left because illusion, no matter how beautiful, was still illusion. And you would rather live in truth, even if it costs you everything, and spend another day as a character in someone else's dream. So no, most will not leave. But you already have. Not because you're better, but because you're willing. Willing to lose the world to find your way back to yourself. Living awake in a sleeping world, you do not escape the matrix by fighting it. You do not burn it down with anger or lecture it into silence. You escape it by seeing, by choosing, by becoming. Escape, you learn, is not departure. It is vision. It is clarity. It is the slow awakening of a mind that no longer wants to be lulled back to sleep. You walk through the same streets. You hear the same conversations. Same slogans still echo from billboards and mouths, but now you see through them. Not with bitterness, but with stillness. You see how people move like sleepwalkers, how they chase what they were told to want, fear what they were trained to fear, and love what was handed to them already wrapped and labeled. You remember when you were one of them? Not long ago? Maybe yesterday? Alan Watts once said, "To wake up, you must first admit you've been asleep." And that's the hard part, because sleep is comfortable. Dreams are seductive. The illusion promises peace, even if it costs your soul. But now you're awake, and waking up isn't a moment. It's a lifetime. A lifelong tension between clarity and fatigue, between seeing the truth and longing to forget it again, because being awake means carrying fire through a world of water. It means feeling everything, the beauty, the absurdity, the ache of existence, without the buffer of denial. Carl Jung called this the return to the self. Not a perfected version of you, but a whole one. You no longer hide your shadow. You no longer wear your persona like armor. You're no longer defined by how you are seen. You move differently, slower, but deeper. Not performative, but present. You speak with fewer words, but greater weight. You listen more. You need less. You observe without judgment, because you know how long it took you to finally open your eyes. You feel the loneliness of awakening, but also its gift. The silence becomes a friend. The solitude becomes a sanctuary. You begin to see that the world, in all its chaos, is not something to fix, but something to understand. You walk through a crowded city, but inside, it's a quiet forest. The noise flows around you, but it does not enter you. It is as if a clear window has opened between you and the world. Now you see with new eyes. Nietzsche once wrote that the individual must rise above the herd, not in superiority but in sincerity. To no longer live according to collective lies, but to create one's values, alone, if necessary. This does not make you arrogant. It makes you accountable. You are not trying to change others. You are learning how to live without betraying yourself. Kierkegaard called this the task of inwardness, to become a self, not through conformity, but through faith in your own contradiction. Yes, the world remains absurd. Yes, there is suffering. Yes, the matrix still hums, tempting you to plug back in, but your eyes won't close again. You've seen too much, and yet you don't run from the world. You return to it, not as a product, but as a person, not as a mask, but as a presence. You shop, you laugh, you work, you speak. But now it's different. Now you choose. You don't chase status. You seek meaning. You don't try to impress. You try to connect. You don't strive to be good. You strive to be true, and truth doesn't shout. It burns, a slow, quiet fire at the center of your chest. This is the fire of awareness, bright but not blinding, warm but not consuming. The fire that lights your way but asks for nothing in return. It flickers during long walks at dusk. It glows when you say no without guilt. It steadies your breath when the old fears knock and you no longer answer. You're not trying to be different. You just are. And that difference makes all the difference. Schopenhauer wrote of quiet strength, of enduring suffering not with rebellion but with understanding. You understand now why people run from themselves. You understand now why most will never leave the illusion. But you are no longer angry, no longer desperate to convert. You are here to be, to live not against the world, but beside it, to become a quiet flame in a field of noise, to carry stillness without needing silence, to be awake fully, finally, in a world that never was. You are not above them. You are not below them. You are simply not of them. And that is enough. You will still forget. You will still fall. You will still be tempted by the dream. Each time you remember, you come back faster, more gently, with less shame. Because awakening is not a finish line. It is a rhythm, a return. And in that rhythm, you find yourself again, not once, but endlessly. And in that quiet repetition, you become free.